Welcome to the Dianne Show, where theory and action collide. Today, we have a very special show with the nominees for the inaugural Nobel Prize in Adult Education. Please welcome Lev Vygotsky, Alan Tuff, and Paulo Freire, experts in the field of adult education. When we think of education, many of us envision a traditional behaviorist approach to learning within a formal setting. The teacher is viewed as an expert depositing knowledge into the minds of passive learners. However, today we are going to look at education from a different perspective. We are going to consider informal learning. That is unstructured, uncredentialed, spontaneous learning that occurs during daily activities. Our experts will share how they utilize the purpose and goals of adult education to teach outside of the formal classroom. First up tonight, Lev Vygotsky. Lev, how does your theoretical perspective support the purpose and goals of adult education?
Thanks, Dianne. It's good to be here tonight. Excuse me, if you will. I have a bad cough. I want to start by saying that while the topic up for discussion this evening is adult education principles and the utilization of informal learning outside the classroom, some may feel that my work, primarily with children, is perhaps misplaced in this dialogue. I want to identify that the application of tenets of my social cognition learning theory lends itself to the principles of adult education very readily. There is an overlap between constructivist and social constructive approaches. The mitigating factor, as I see it, is that in a social constructivist model, learners require a person who already has disability knowledge and is willing to teach alongside the learner. The teacher, who I will now refer to as the most knowledgeable other, or MKO, pulls the learner along with them in an effort to increase the learner's knowledge, skills, abilities. This is as opposed to constructivism, which is solely based on the internal learning development of the individual. The culture in which the learner exists also provides support and cues that learning needs to occur. This happens through social interaction with the MKO. The MKO may model behaviors and/or provide verbal instructions for the learner. This is referred to as cooperative or collaborative dialogue. I apologize. Only have this silly cough that will not go away. To continue. The learner seeks to understand the actions or instructions provided by the MKO, then internalizes the information, using it to guide or regulate their own performance. An integral part of social cognitive learning theory is the application of knowledge for learners through a peer or social context. Now, I would suggest to you that you cannot go learning something that is not within your purview without the appropriate foundation. So I identified that the learning occurs within the ZPD, or Zone of Proximal Development. This is a range where tasks are within the learner's cognitive ability to learn. The instructions for the learner is not too difficult, but just exceeds the learner's current level of skills and abilities. The learner still requires assistance to complete the learning, ergo the necessary involvement of the MKO. The acquisition of new skills is not completed through absorption, but rather a constructive process of learning and participating in the new skill. You may be familiar with the term scaffolding. Although I did not come up with this particular terminology, I like what it represents. It refers to the concept of building on previous knowledge, and the MKO adjusts the support needed to the learner. And, as learning continues, the MKO pulls back on instructions and provides a more supportive yet less direct role.
That is a very interesting perspective, Lev, especially the concept of the zone of proximal development. Alan Tuff, are you in agreement with Lev Vygotsky, or do you envision a different goal for adult education?
Firstly, Dianne, thank you for inviting me to your show. I've done many conferences and written some books, but this is a first for me. It's a pleasure to be here. To answer your question, humans have the potential for growth and development, so I believe that the purpose of adult education is to guide learners in their learning. As adult educators, I find we often ignore informal learning even though it is so deeply embedded in our everyday lives that we don't even notice we're learning. For my PhD thesis, I studied a fascinating subject: learners learning about something on their own. However, what I discovered through interviews is that informal learning is actually a social phenomenon. We found that to complete a learning project, the adults sourced about 10 people for input, direction, or clarification. My team and I also realized that people have a knack for planning their learning. Almost all informal learners perform the preparatory steps as self-learners. This means the learner makes most of the decisions, even if they seek information or advice from others, such as professors, neighbors, friends, etc.
Fascinating. Paulo Freire, what are your thoughts?
I was imprisoned for 70 days as a traitor in Brazil and lived in exile for 15 years due to the radical nature of my ideas and my willingness to critically question the dominant socially held views. Based on my work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and my mass literacy campaigns for Latin American education, I proposed a critical theory perspective towards adult education. Living among the poor, rural families and laborers, my experiences highlighted the relationship between socioeconomic class and education. I encouraged the development of critical consciousness, which permits individuals to question the nature of their historical and social situation, as well as take action against the oppressive forces that are recognized through this problem-posing process. I consider the purpose of adult education to be a social change and liberation from oppression. It is through critical questioning combined with action that leads to social change. For example, dialogue is a problem-posing approach that uses questions to advance critical thinking. This includes an awareness of the social forces that influence our lives. During this problem-posing approach, the teacher and learner interact on a horizontal rather than hierarchical plane. Together, they learn, question, reflect, and create meaning. It is through this process that we gain an awareness of the social forces that are directing our lives.
Wow, you have each presented a very unique view in relation to the purpose and goals of adult education. With such varying concepts, it is hard to envision how each of your theories can be applied to real life. Before the show, I had my favorite movie of all times about adult education, Good Will Hunting, playing in the green room while our panel of experts were waiting. This movie sparked an interesting discussion as each theorist identified a scene within the movie representative of their theoretical perspective on informal adult education. However, we're currently out of time, so when we're back from commercials, we'll have each theorist present a clip from the movie.